put in my AirPods for this one. Good afternoon, officially, everyone. I hope you're doing well on this gloomy, humid-ish Wednesday afternoon. So happy to have you with us, and hope the weather where you are is inside and maybe a little bit more cool than outside. But if you're outside, that's great as well.
All right, so we are going to give a few minutes to let everybody get in and get settled. So in the meantime, let's see what question can we ask folks today? I feel like, Patrick, your shirt is so inspiring. We need to talk about it. We need to embrace the holiday. The summer is coming. If anybody has some interesting plans as folks are getting vaccinated, perhaps, and maybe are starting to think about visiting family again. Anybody got anything interesting maybe coming up this summer that they're looking to do? Feel free to share in the chat. Or Patrick, it looks like you have something you want to share.
Yes, Jen, as you know, as of tomorrow, I will be on almost a 2-week-long vacation visiting my family back in Louisiana. This is going to be very nice for me. I haven't seen my mother since November 2019. And to everyone on the line with a mother, that's probably way too long. So I'm getting in the vacation merriment spirit, and like I said, I'm wearing the shirt for the weather I want.
I love that. That is definitely way too long to not get to see family members. That's especially a mom. Oh my goodness.
And my dad's there too, but he's fine.
He hasn't noticed you're gone. Your mom knows every minute of every day.
Yes.
Ooh, we've got somebody visiting family in, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, Guyana. South America. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds fabulous.
Good food, good weather. I'm gonna eat my face off nonstop. y'all don't even know, just nothing but seafood. I reached out to one of my old roommates and I was like, hey, I'm coming in town this Friday. And he's like, great, we'll boil some crawfish and grill some oysters for you. And I was like, oh, wow. Promised land.
So you're bringing me back to my Tulane days.
You know, yeah.
I totally know about crawfish. Yes. Yeah. Nice brown paper bags.
All right. Oh, food is life. Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, Linda, Eric, do either of you have anything exciting going on coming up for the summer? Any vacation plans, family plans?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm trying to get through 2 graduations here at Vanderbilt. We have our class coming back this weekend, and then 2 weeks hence we have the class of 2021, and then hopefully the smoke will clear a little bit and I'll come up with the plan, but none yet.
Right. I forgot you're doing the double graduation. We headed up to Maryland, where I grew up, for a month this summer on the Chesapeake Bay. My son is a college baseball player, and he is playing in a collegiate league in Maryland, DC area. So we're doing a change of venue for a little while.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fun. I love it. Well, Patrick, do you think we're good to go? We've got quite a few folks in here. Do we want to?
Yeah, it's 12:04. I think we can go ahead and just get started with kind of some basics. So welcome everyone to Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream. My name is Patrick King. I'm an education manager with Urban Green Lab. And I'm joined by my co-hostess with the mostest, Jenn Harrman, and I'll leave her introduction to her.
Yes, I am here. I'm with Public Works. I'm the waste reduction program manager here at Public Works. So I am your guru for all things recycling here in Nashville. And so just as a reminder to everybody, we've got it up on the screen, but if you have questions that you want to ask our panelists today, all that information you can send in the chat. Patrick and I are going to be monitoring that. And please use that to chat with and connect with other people, provide your thoughts and any reactions you have to what's going on, but also make sure to throw your questions in that chat feature, or if you have any issues, please pop those in the chat. I'm also going to pop in our YouTube playlist. So if you have not checked out some of our other episodes in Sustainable in the City Thinking Upstream, check out our playlist. Make sure you subscribe to Urban Green Lab's YouTube channel so you can keep up to date with all of the past episodes and all of the episodes for the rest of the year. We've got some really, really great episodes out there already under our belt. And I'm going to let Patrick tell you about today's episode and our awesome guests that we have.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much for that, Jen. So yes, all the things Jen said, if you have any questions throughout the entire program, feel free to just go ahead and plop those in the chat or message me directly. I'm going to be monitoring those, and then we're going to get to Q&A right around 1 p.m. If you can't stick around for that, totally fine, because as Jen said, we are recording this. It's going to be on YouTube, so you can go back there and watch it if you'd like, or just maybe even submit a question before you go if you have one. But bringing it back, today's topic is planning for a changing climate in Nashville, and we are so lucky because today, if you didn't know this, the Metro has a Sustainability Advisory Committee. And today we're going to be speaking with co-chairs from the Sustainability Advisory Committee. We have Linda Breggin, who's the director for the Center for State, Tribal, and Local Environmental Programs at the Environmental Law Institute. And then we also have Eric Kopstain from Vanderbilt University, where he is the Vice Chancellor for Administration. So without further ado, it is a pleasure and an honor to introduce Eric and Linda.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick and Jen, for having us. We're delighted to be here. And Jen, I think if you want to go to the first slide, because
Jen, you are muted.
You know, we did test this and it was all working perfectly. Maybe I'll just go ahead and jump in while we're figuring out the slides. If that's
Sorry, I just tried to stop my share and it did not want to do that. Hold on.
Well, no worries. I'm just going to start talking because
Go for it.
Eric and I need to start by recognizing that everything we're going to relay to you today was developed by a group of very dedicated volunteer experts on Mayor Cooper's Sustainability Advisory Committee, including a steering committee that served as co-chairs of the various subcommittees we established, which I'll discuss in a minute, but their names are going to be listed on the slide that is going to show up momentarily. And we also want to recognize the mayor's office staff and the Metro staff, Mike Jameson and Mary Beth Eichard and Laurel Creech, Michelle Hammond, Sharon Smith, and of course, Jenn Harrman, and others who really provided vital advice to us in our committee work. And also want to just mention two Vanderbilt professors, Mike Vandenberg and Jonathan Gilligan, who really have made major contributions to our efforts. So if you would go to the next slide, if that's possible. I don't know if it is.
Here we go. Do we have it? Are we on it? Okay.
All right. Thanks.
So I've already recognized and thanked all these fabulous people. So we can go to the next slide. And before I jump in, I think we need to just talk about a little bit of background information before we go to the committee's work. And I know that most of you know this already, but it bears repeating that there's overwhelming scientific consensus that human activities are driving climate change. There are just a multitude of studies attributing both incremental change and extreme weather events to anthropogenic climate change. And, you know, these changes include extreme heat and natural disasters, sea level rise, species extinction, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, food insecurity, water shortages, reduced economic growth. And I know this is a daunting list, but I wanted to be clear about our starting premise, and that is that we have a serious problem. And like other cities, Nashville's energy use, transportation, other activities produce significant greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. And we'll talk more about this later, but buildings and facilities in particular account for the largest portion of Metro government's footprint, whereas community emissions are mostly from transportation in addition to energy use in commercial, residential, and industrial buildings. It's also important to recognize as a general matter that cities make up more than half of the world's population. And Cities consume more than 2/3 of the world's energy. And so as a result, cities have a really critical role to play in climate mitigation. But each city faces its own mitigation and adaptation challenges. And a side note here is that we're focused today, what Eric and I are going to be talking about mostly is climate mitigation as opposed to climate adaptation or responding to the negative effects of climate change. We are focused on how our city can lower its carbon footprint. So back to what's happening in Nashville. It's estimated that between 2025 and 2035, we will face myriad climate risks, including increased number of intense storms and tornadoes and more frequent flooding and extreme heat days. And I think, a lot of us obviously feel like this is kind of already happening. And Nashville also, so many people don't necessarily think about, may be adversely affected by the disruptions arising from climate change elsewhere in the United States and around the globe. I mean, basically, as people need to leave or migrate because of sea level rise in places like New Orleans, Patrick was just talking about Louisiana, parts of Florida or Maryland, as I mentioned, where I'm going this summer, people are going to have to leave those places and they have to move somewhere. And Nashville is one of the places that people are likely to move because it's a great place to live and it's not as far, away as some other places are from the places that people need to leave. So I will just say that while this is obviously all a very challenging backdrop, our committee tried to outline a range of recommendations and actions for Nashville to reduce its carbon footprint. But, and this is really, really important, at the same time, ensure a healthy, prosperous, and resilient future, right? I mean, this is not all gloom and doom. And as we'll discuss, climate mitigation actions not only allow Nashville to contribute to reducing the negative impacts of climate change, but there's a range of other benefits. And that includes fostering economic development and job creation, improving health and economic inclusion, and in some cases in advancing environmental equity. So, as I said, it's not all a gloomy picture, but recognizing these serious challenges, in December 2019, the mayor announced that the city had rejoined the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy that we refer to as GCOM. GCOM is a voluntary alliance of over 10,000 cities and local governments worldwide that have made voluntary commitments to reduce their carbon footprints. And in aggregate, this could have a huge impact. It could account, if they reach these targets, it could account for 2.3 billion tons of annual carbon emissions reductions. I mean, that is like taking all passenger cars off, the roads, like eradicating their emissions. US, China, France, Mexico, Russia, and Argentina all combined. So it gives you a sense of what the impact is of cities reducing their footprint. So cities that join GCOM pledged to develop a citywide climate action plan within 3 years that includes a citywide greenhouse gas emissions target, as well as the emissions reduction actions necessary to meet that target. Now, after joining GCOM in February 2020, Mayor Cooper established our Sustainability Advisory Committee to advise on a wide range of sustainability issues. But as we'll discuss, we decided to focus first on the Climate Action Plan. So if you go to the next slide, Jen. Our committee process is pretty straightforward. We divided into subcommittees based on the components of a climate action plan: energy, buildings, mobility, natural resources, and waste. And then each subcommittee, as I mentioned, had terrific co-chairs that were listed on the first slide. Now, over on the side, you'll see there's a subcommittee on resilience and adaptation. And what we mean by that is how to respond to the effects of climate change. And we had the incredible co-chairs, Jacqueline Motepe from TDEC and Janie Camp at Vanderbilt. They are working directly with the mayor's staff on that ongoing effort to develop an adaptation plan for the city, because there is a lot of more preliminary work to do on that aspect of the plan. And then the rest of the committee, including Eric and I, focused on mitigation actions. So if you go to the next slide. Each subcommittee developed a set of recommendations that include strategies and specific actions. They also developed a benefit statement for each recommended action. This is essentially the elevator talk, like, this is why you should do this climate mitigation action in one sentence. And then to the extent they could, they estimated capital and operational cost ranges as well. It was a tremendous amount of work over about a 6-month period, and they developed so many ideas and information. And the committee report that has all of these recommendations in it is online on the mayor's website. And I think if it hasn't already been put in the chat, it will be. And I should have mentioned earlier that each subcommittee was assigned Metro agency staff who served as incredibly valuable resources. And I mentioned some of them on the first slide, especially our Jenn Harrman, who's on today. But there were a lot of other people who contributed. But at the same time, I really want to emphasize that the recommendations are recommendations from the volunteers on the committee. They're not attributable to Metro staff. They were just there as incredibly important resources. I also want to highlight that the committee obtained input from the Mayor's Youth Council, which is a group of basically local high school students who are just real leaders in our community. And they did this really inspirational vision statement entitled Healthy, Safe, and Equitable Nashville. And that is an exhibit to the committee's report. And I think Eric agrees with me that we really can't emphasize enough that moving forward, the city needs to continue to engage Nashville youth as they are Nashville's long-term environmental stewards and the generation most affected by climate change in the near future. And lastly, I just want to mention that the pandemic definitely limited the extent to which we could do in-person meetings, and it definitely affected the number and timing of hours that our volunteer committee members had available. So part of what we did to address this challenge was to build on the valuable work that was already produced through other initiatives, which were developed with substantial community input already, such as Plan to Play and Livable Nashville and Nashville Next and others. But we're also quite confident that as the city considers the committee's recommendations and hopefully incorporates some of them into the climate action plan, that there will be opportunities for public engagement and comment. This is just, as we all know, been a very unusual period. Jen, if you'll go to the next slide. So we had several objectives. As I mentioned, we decided to focus on advising the city on its climate action plan because the mayor had rejoined GCOM and the climate issue is, of course, critical. And we wanted, though, to make sure to focus on and identify the highest potential mitigation actions and not just provide a laundry list of actions. We really want to make sure the city doesn't lose track of the big picture here. What are the main things that need to get done? But at the same time, we wanted to identify additional actions too, because there's so much that can be done. And you will tell when you look at the report, you will be like blown away at how many actions were identified. And we wanted to also offer some actions that were lower cost or could be done in the shorter term. In terms of objectives, we also wanted to make sure to address cross-cutting issues that pertain to all climate action efforts, such as how to finance the recommended actions, how to ensure environmental equity, how to promote public-private partnerships and leadership, which Eric is going to talk about more soon. And then I finally want to mention that working independently from us, Professor Jonathan Gilligan and his graduate student team at Vanderbilt are working to develop an interactive tool for the public that will allow people to run various scenarios on how the city can reduce its carbon footprint. That project's still in the works, so we'll talk more about it later, unless people want more information. Okay, Jen, if you'll go to the next slide. So the first thing we needed to do was set a recommended target for the city to reduce its carbon footprint. And basically what we did was we looked at best practices. What are similar cities doing? What are scientists telling us should be the target in order to avoid catastrophic climate change? And so we set the recommended target at 80% reduction in annual greenhouse gas emissions from 2014 levels by 2050. And that is for both the metro government footprint, but also for the community-wide footprint. So if you go to the next slide, Jen, let's talk about the additional reasons why a city would want to reduce its carbon footprint, right? In addition to reducing the impacts of climate change. These so-called co-benefits are actually a major motivator for cities in lowering carbon footprints. And when people know about these benefits, they're understandably much more likely to support taking climate action. So a key co-benefit is public health. When you move away from coal to renewable energy, air quality improves. And when you move to electric vehicles, air quality can improve. And when people take more transit or carpool, air quality improves. And so studies show that the health impacts and the associated cost reductions are really impressive. And we cite some of these studies in the committee report. And economic development and job creation is another co-benefit of taking action on climate change. A recent study by David Gardner and Associates, and I can send the link for this, found that the relative availability of renewable energy can influence where businesses decide to locate, because more and more businesses are prioritizing greenhouse gas emission reductions in their own operations. So for example, half of the Fortune 500 have set carbon reduction goals, and then this influences their supply chains as well. So small and medium-sized businesses also have incentives to decarbonize. But the challenge here in our city is that TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, according to this study, lags behind electricity providers in our peer cities, the cities that we compete with for business. So Austin, Indianapolis, Charlotte, and others. And TVA lags in terms of the current percentage of renewable energy it provides, but also its carbon commitments beyond 2030. And this situation may put Nashville at a disadvantage for new business relocations and the jobs that go with them. But I also want to shift gears and mention the co-benefits of job creation in another context. So there are job opportunities associated with making buildings more efficient through retrofits. There are jobs associated with solar panel installation, for example. And there are opportunities for job training in these areas as well that can lead to economic inclusion. And then lastly, I want to mention environmental equity is a third co-benefit in some cases of taking action on climate change. And I'll talk more about this in a minute, but an example is weatherization programs, right? Which can reduce the energy burden or the amount paid for electricity by low income households. And if you will go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we wanted to emphasize the importance of taking the actions that will result in the largest reductions and that are needed in order for the city to meet its target. In Nashville, and this is true for other cities as well, the big rocks, as my co-chair Eric calls them, the actions that will get about 60 to 70% of needed reductions in most cities are to decarbonize the grid, electrify buildings, and electrify government and community-wide fleets. And the importance of these three actions is laid out in an article by the two Vanderbilt professors I mentioned earlier, Mike Vandenberg and Jonathan Gilligan. They call them the forks in the road, right? The forks in the road that a city needs to take to make meaningfully reduce their emissions. And they also talk about lock-in effects, those steps that a city needs to avoid or they will lock in high emissions rates. So an example might be that a city should not go out right now, and buy a new fleet of diesel buses that costs a lot and will be around for a long time, when really what they need to do is buy electric buses, if that makes sense. And I would also add that reducing vehicle miles traveled is really important as well, and so is increasing the energy efficiency of buildings. And Eric's going to talk more about the specific recommendations in these areas in a few minutes, but I do think it bears emphasis, that we need to stay focused on these three big pieces, because it's easy to get distracted by cool projects that don't necessarily have that much impact. So if you go to the next slide, please. So we recommended a lot of actions on climate change, but as we know, our city, like so many cities, has some major financial constraints right now. So we emphasize in our report, first of all, that a lot of climate actions do not require major expenditures. We also emphasize the importance of considering the full cost picture. In many cases, the social and environmental benefits of the recommended actions, like improved public health that I just talked about will partially and sometimes even fully offset the costs of taking the action. At the same time, we recognize there are significant financial costs associated with some of the recommendations. And so in the report, we advised the mayor to establish a task force to identify feasible green finance and other innovative funding mechanisms to support the city's climate action plan. There are more and more developments in financing that cities are pursuing in connection with climate action plan implementation. And we list several of these possible financing options that the city could explore, like green municipal bonds, which actually the city already uses. These are bonds that can be used to finance a range of government infrastructure projects, a lot of the ones that are commonly in climate mitigation plans, such as efficiency upgrades to government buildings. Another finance mechanism are energy savings performance contracts. So these are contracts with energy services companies, we call them ESCOs, and to finance and install projects designed to improve building efficiency and reduce maintenance costs, usually over like a 10 to 20 year period. These contracts typically guarantee energy savings and then use the savings from the energy efficiency projects to pay the ESCO and offset capitalization, operation, and maintenance and monitoring costs. So for example, these kind of contracts could be used to finance retrofits on buildings, for example. Another thing that we flag in the report is that utilities around the country are increasingly playing a role in the development of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, including funding actually like municipal electric bus fleets. And in some cases, they're also supporting, as I say, like the purchases, not just the infrastructure. And this makes sense because in turn, the utilities benefit from the increased electric power sales. So it's a win-win, right? We are not doing that here now. The other thing we outline in the report are philanthropic initiatives. Grant makers, philanthropies, private foundations really can play a role in financing climate action plan implementation. Local funders can make equity investments in local businesses and social entrepreneurs that are offering creative solutions for addressing climate change, or as grant makers, they could build the capacity of nonprofits to educate and advocate for climate change. And this is happening in other cities. And in addition to financing approaches in the report, we also included some specific grant opportunities. There are a lot of federal grants out there that cities can apply for to help them with their climate action plans. And I think I've got one more slide before I hand it over to Eric. Okay, environmental equity. When we talk about environmental equity, what we're aiming for here in Nashville is that no single group or community faces disadvantages in dealing with environmental hazards or disasters or pollution. And unfortunately, Nashville, like so many other cities, has a less than stellar history around equity. And to this day, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by a wide variety of social inequities. The committee included some specific actions to address inequities, but we really didn't have time or the ability during COVID to meaningfully involve communities in the process. And that is just critical. So we essentially put a pin in it and we said, we're going to come back to this incredibly important issue, but we recommended that the mayor establish an environmental equity task force. And we set out some things that we hope the task force will look at, including establishing routinized, replicable processes for ensuring early, continuous, and meaningful involvement from all residents, especially vulnerable populations, in the development and implementation of the climate action plan. Basically, we need to find a way to systematize community involvement based on best practices rather than involve the public on a case-by-case basis. We just need to make this the norm. We also suggested the task force look at various tools that are now available, equity screening tools similar to what are used in Cleveland, for example, where there's a set of questions that help ensure, that help users work through an action to determine if it's going to advance equity, Or there's this really cool tool called Cal EnviroScreen used in California. It's a database mapping tool that identifies communities disproportionately burdened by multiple sources of pollution. And these tools can just be really useful. So we're hoping the city will consider using them. And we also recommended that the Equity Task Force identify long-term capacity building and outreach efforts with low-income communities and communities of color, and also to explore a green jobs initiative that could include job training to work as energy conservation technicians, solar power project developers, landscape technicians. So to recap, what we're aiming for here is systemic change, not standalone projects. And with that, that was a lot. I'm going to hand it over to Eric to talk about the city's carbon footprint and what we specifically recommended, as well as he's also going to talk about the very cool things that Vanderbilt is doing on climate. Thank you.
Well, hey, thank you, Linda. That was phenomenal. And I just want to underscore before I get into this section of the presentation, some of the comments that Linda made. This Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee, as you saw from the org chart and the list of names, was populated by a wide range of really, really talented and diverse people from across the city. And I have had so much fun, and I have learned so much by being able to participate in this group. I consider it a real honor. I've enjoyed working with Linda, and we are really, in many ways, I feel like we are just really getting started here. So anyhow, I'm going to start here with a little bit on the city's carbon footprint, and we'll look to the left at the community inventory as of 2017. It's not listed here on the slide, but Nashville's community emissions totaled roughly 11.4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And as you can see from the breakdown in the pie chart, almost half, I think as Linda mentioned earlier on, half are from transportation, and that is mostly in the form of private cars and trucks, while energy use in commercial, residential, and industrial buildings account for most of the other half at the community level. And then if you move to the right, you can see in 2017, again here, the metro government greenhouse gas emissions in 2017 totaled roughly 600,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And as this figure illustrates, you can see that buildings and facilities are really the greatest source of that emission at 47%. And that's followed by water and wastewater treatment, employee commuting, and solid waste activities. So in some of the subsequent slides, we're going to talk about the broad-based mitigation strategies and some of the actions that we think can really serve to reduce these emissions. So if we can move to the next slide. So here you can see that the committee identified several what we think of as broad-based strategies that provide, as Linda said, the largest mitigation potential. And importantly, these align with that forks in the road concept and approach that Linda described earlier. So at a broad level, these strategies include decarbonizing the grid, electrifying government and community fleets, electrifying buildings, decreasing vehicle miles traveled, improving efficiency of facilities, and reducing landfill food waste disposal while increasing diversion of recyclable paper and cardboard. I'll identify soon some of the specific actions that support each of these strategies, but you can see here, to be effective on mitigation, there are a range of different topics and techniques that need to be utilized and addressed. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll get more into some of the specific suggested actions that support those broad strategies that I just described. So on decarbonizing the grid. So the committee really believes the city needs to dramatically accelerate the adoption of renewable energy and use a multifaceted approach that includes more behind the meter solar, a community-wide goal of 100% carbon-free electricity, and strong encouragement to our colleagues at NES and TVA to increase their current 5% renewables cap that is in place. Moving on to electrifying the fleet, the committee encourages metro government to adopt electrical vehicles And that includes WeGo and Metro Nashville public school buses, and also, as Linda said, within the community for personal and business use for transportation. And also, and this is really important, to be successful, as noted here, the city has to find ways, whether themselves or in partnership with others, to provide support for the necessary electrical vehicle infrastructure that's necessary to electrify fleets. Moving on, electrifying buildings. So the committee thinks the city should both incentivize and require measures that accelerate the electrification of buildings. Some actions that were suggested include the establishment of carbon targets, for example, for new residential buildings, and also really prioritizing retrofits of the worst performing buildings that can be identified through the use of energy audits. And then on reducing vehicle miles traveled. So the committee encourages working with Metro Council to develop a citywide transportation demand management program. And also, as has been discussed for years in Nashville, establishing dedicated funding for public transit, like so many of our peer cities have already been able to accomplish. And then I'll say some other suggestions that are not listed here, but I think are interesting, include completing the 91-mile priority bike network and the 23-mile City Central Greenway that have been discussed for some time, so that we can reduce drive-alone trips and importantly, provide optionality to the citizens of the Nashville community. And finally, developing a Vision Zero plan for pedestrian and bike safety. And then on waste reduction, the committee proposed phasing in a food waste plan that prohibits food scraps from trash collection. And then another action not listed here, but that's in the report that I really like, is the establishment of a construction and demolition transfer and recycling facility in Davidson County. I won't go into detail now, but I saw that Manuel Zeitlin is on this call, and this is something that he and I and some of our Vanderbilt colleagues and other colleagues at Metro are actually actively discussing in the context of an upcoming construction project at Vanderbilt University. And I'll say, as Linda underscored as well, the report contained many additional mitigation actions and a lot more detail on each of those. So I encourage you to click on the report and take a look at it. So if we move on to the next slide, here I'll talk a little bit about outreach and education. And the report offers a statement here that underscores the importance of outreach and education and several themes that the committee thinks are critical to making outreach efforts successful. So again, to underscore what Linda said, it's essential. It's really essential to include the community's voice and to teach the community about climate impacts and, importantly, those co-benefits that were outlined earlier in terms of public health, economic development, and inclusion. And then even more importantly, I think, a solid outreach and education process has to provide opportunities for community input and stakeholder engagement. We have to create mechanisms for the community to understand and to own these efforts, and thereby extend the reach of the committee and the city through proactive outreach that's both meaningful and also, importantly, not seen as overbearing or really imperialistic, kind of meeting the community where they are and meaningfully having dialogues and seeking input. Next slide, please. So some examples here of leadership initiatives that were offered in the report include leadership at the regional level. For example, we thought about the notion of convening mayors across the TVA region to advocate for renewable energy and a cleaner TVA grid. Linda emphasized the criticality of that, not just for health, but also for economic development and the attractiveness of the TVA region, broadly speaking, from an economic perspective. Metro and other organizations, we think, can incentivize sustainable behaviors through programs they can create and challenges. We think challenges are often a good mechanism to gain involvement and to move the dial. And we need to rally the private sector around these topics. This is one area where I think Vanderbilt can and will play a role, for example, by convening other local higher ed institutions, for instance, around topics of sustainability. That's something that Linda and I are working on actively right now and hope to launch pretty soon. And I think it's also important that I think, as I've learned from my work on this committee, is there is so much to learn and so many opportunities for partnership across the private sector, which I think as a sector is in a unique position to move quickly and create positive and really visible impacts. So with that, this part of our presentation concludes. And I just want to say again, what a pleasure it's been to have the opportunity to work with Linda and so many other talented colleagues on these topics, and there will be more to come. Again, I see the report that we submitted as nothing more than really the end of the beginning, and I really look forward to continued progress.
Yeah, and I would just add, I have very much enjoyed working with Eric, and in fact, we are going to be announcing soon a whole series of outreach meetings that our committee is going to host. So that'll be announced soon.
Yeah, thanks, Linda, for mentioning that. That's a key point. We're getting the schedules revved up, and I think we have some really good programs coming up. So keep an eye on that Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee website, and we encourage you to attend. So since we have, an hour and a half today, and I like to involve myself in the efforts at Vanderbilt University around sustainability, I thought I'd kind of switch over to a different presentation. And this presentation is maybe 10 to 15 minutes. It's not super in depth, but it's intended to give you a sense of some of the things that Vanderbilt University is doing on the sustainability front. And you'll see that many of those things echo those forks in the road and many of the other topics that we've been discussing so far. So I have a lot to share, but I'll share it quickly. And so here we go. Let's go to the next slide, please. I think this is really interesting and important. This is data from the Princeton Review, and it tells, I think, a really important story. High school students care a lot, and increasingly, if you look at this data longitudinally, they care a lot about a university's position on sustainability, and they actually consider this strongly when they make choices about where they go to college. So I point out all the time within the context of Vanderbilt to colleagues that this is an example of where our business interests as a university really do intersect with sustainability. It's a topic, we have to pay attention to for several reasons. One, it's a critically important topic in and of itself for all the reasons Linda articulated so well at the beginning, but also our stakeholders, they expect Vanderbilt to exert leadership on the sustainability front. And if we don't, we are not going to have the best students, nor the best faculty, nor the best staff. So we take this very, very seriously. Next slide, please. So some of you may know we created a campus master plan, and we call it Future VU, and it started back in 2014. And really, from the onset, we wanted to establish for our campus what we like to refer to as true north. And that was really achieved by establishing here a set of guiding principles. And I want to underscore, we developed these guiding principles with broad input from our community and stakeholders. The first year or so of our efforts were simply around listening sessions on campus. What do you like about campus? What do you don't like about campus? What should the future of the campus be? And we had input, students, faculty, staff, board members, alumni, community members, and other stakeholders. And you can see here, while there's a lot of information on this slide, sustainability is identified as a core objective for Vanderbilt and for the campus. And it's really been embedded in our thinking about our future from really the very beginning of our efforts here. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I like to think that we've been doing a lot at Vanderbilt. This slide here is really a brief overview of, many, but not all, of what I think of as some major steps that Vanderbilt has taken this century to contribute to moving the institution towards greater sustainability. So for example, we started publishing greenhouse gas annual inventories as early as 2008. I think my colleague Andrea George might be on this call. She's been instrumental in all of these efforts and is just an outstanding leader and colleague who's been moving the dial on all of these things. We established earth-friendly move-in days in 2010. We got rid of our coal plant in 2014. I remember when I first visited the Vanderbilt campus in 2012, I realized that the most visible landmark of the institution was a 305-foot high coal stack. And I humbly asked our now Chancellor Emeritus, Nick Zeppos, politely, like kind of paraphrasing, what is up with that? And we rapidly actually moved to decommissioning that. And I'm proud of that. And again, we finalized our future VU land use plan. That's been kind of a broad framework for so many of our efforts on campus. And again, emphasize sustainability as a key objective. And I'll talk about a few more of these that are on the slide as we continue. So let's go to the next one. So we plan to do more. And here I'd like to say, I think that setting goals is really, really important. It gives an institution something. Getting a lot of texts. Sorry about those beeps. So again, setting goals is important. It gives an institution something, to strive to achieve. And also, I think really important, something that can be measured and reported out to the community so they know where we are and that we're upholding our values and our objectives are being accomplished. And so we announced some bold goals that you may or may not know about. We announced that we would be carbon neutral by 2050 and we would achieve zero waste by 2030, which I'll talk about in more depth. So let's go to the next slide. So here you see kind of a very high level simplified overview of Vanderbilt's current greenhouse gas footprint, which, again, we can think about in three buckets. Our first bucket as described here comes from our purchased electricity. So think TVA, NES, while the second bucket, which not entirely unlike Metro, is 45%, similar percentage. It comes from our buildings, our fuel that's used by our power plant, refrigerants, et cetera. And bucket three is really our vehicular travel, our air travel, waste, et cetera. And to really mitigate and eliminate our greenhouse gases, again, Vanderbilt, just like the city, as evidenced by all the strategies we outlined for the city, you really have to deploy a range of approaches. So as we've been thinking about this, we always want to not just talk about these things, but immediately pivot to how do we actually get there? What can we actually do? So let's go to the next slide. And here I'm going to talk about what are we doing on electricity, okay? And this is something that I'm actually really proud of. And one way, we moved forward was through a recently announced large-scale renewable energy partnership with TVA and NES. And this partnership will create large-scale solar installations in Tennessee in the case of Vanderbilt, but anywhere in the multi-state TVA region. And these solar arrays are going to provide 100% of Vanderbilt's electrical consumption from green energy. So that is one big step, in my view, as it's going to eliminate 25% of Vanderbilt's greenhouse gas footprint by 2023. The two solar installations will come online, one in 2022, one in 2023. And importantly, this, in my view, is not just a major step forward for Vanderbilt in reducing its footprint, but for the entire TVA region. As this program that enables this it's called Green Invest. It was designed not to just be a one-off for Vanderbilt, where Vanderbilt got what it wanted from TVA and NES through a private, kind of deal behind the scenes, but rather it created a framework that can be leveraged across the entire TVA region. So it's scalable and it's available to other organizations across the TVA region, including Metro Nashville, who recently kind of co-subscribed to the installation in Tullahoma, Tennessee, that will come online in 2023 to help Metro achieve its short-term goals around renewables. So next slide, please. So here I'm going to do two slides on what are we doing on buildings, and campus. And that future VU framework I talked about earlier, it calls for an overarching campus-wide target of 50% green space, 25% hardscape, and 25% building footprint, as you can see on the left. And then to the right, you can see the current campus breakdown. And you can see we have more progress to make. And as development continues on campus with all of our guiding principles in mind, we're going to move the dial and move closer and closer over time to our target. And again, once again, this is an example of goals, against which we can track progress and we can report out to the community. And on the right, you can see a quick example of a neighborhood. This sometimes was referred to as Greek Row, sometimes now the West End neighborhood, But for those of you who are familiar with this part of campus, we transformed it by reclaiming roadways and parking lots to create really green community spaces and walkways that are all accessible, and they're pedestrian and bike centric. You can see those before pictures. It was all, you know, cars parked in ugly alleys, above ground electrical. And I think this neighborhood before this effort was the least attractive part of campus. And now I think it's a vastly improved place whose character reflects the values of the institution and are moving the dial on some of our important sustainability objectives. So next slide, please. Here I'm going to talk about buildings. So this graphic highlights our green buildings. We currently have 22 LEED certified buildings on campus. We have one building designed to achieve WELL certification. That's our recent School of Nursing addition and renovation. And one building, excuse me, designed to achieve Living Building Challenge PETAL certification. And that's our Homeck Mayborn connector building project that recently opened. And I'm really excited by our future prospects on buildings as well. We have many capital projects underway and also in planning. And we do intend to go much further to ensure we deliver a very high quality and sustainable built environment at Vanderbilt. And on the building front as well, I am super proud that Vanderbilt was recently honored with the 2020 Leadership Award from the U.S. Green Building Council for achievements in green building and our commitment to creating a healthy, sustainable future. So I'll also say, you know, referring to the kind of the bottom left sections, our plans rely on a campus-wide approach to stormwater management. And we implement a variety as a result of green infrastructure and low impact development practices, which include bioretention areas and other things to achieve our stormwater goals. So next slide, please. So now I'll talk quickly about what are we doing on mobility. So Vanderbilt does have a transportation and mobility plan. It's called MOVE-VU, with the goal of shifting our transportation mode share by reducing the drive alone rate to campus from 76.5% to 55% by 2025. We may need to revisit these goals in the kind of the post-COVID world. A lot has changed, and that may have some impacts on these goals, and we may become more aggressive as a result. But to do this, we're enhancing and really promoting sustainable commute options, and we're incentivizing commuters to change their behavior. Some of the same themes that we were talking about on a citywide basis. And you can see on the right that our MOVE-VU plan, it really outlines what I think of as a mobility hierarchy, where walking, biking, and transit are always prioritized over the personal car. And I'll also say this is an area where there's strong partnership between administrators and our faculty, staff, and students, and where it's been particularly impactful. We've been the recipient of over $10 million of CMAQ grants, which are congestion mitigation and air quality grants that are supporting both the direct implementation of this program as well as some of the research and learning opportunities that attend that with many of our faculty. So, you know, more to come on this. Oh, and I'll also say quickly, you know, you see goal 3, electrify the fleet. So just literally over the past 2 days, we interviewed my team and I interviewed 4 fleet management suppliers with the objective of identifying a partner who can help us electrify the Vanderbilt vehicle fleet by 2030. And it was really interesting. We got into the infrastructure investments and how do you do that? And I think that our efforts here may be instructive to some of the broader city efforts as we sort of figure this out. Next slide, please. And then what are we doing on waste? So I mentioned our zero waste goal, which focuses on reducing waste generation by 30% by 2030, and also achieving a 90% diversion rate from landfill by 2030. So you may know in 2020, Vanderbilt announced the elimination of single-use plastics. And that was another example of a collaborative effort that involved our student organizations and members of my team. And these numbers I find fascinating. Those single-use plastic elimination efforts are going to save more than 430,000 plastic bottles a year, which is really 1.7 million bottles or so during a graduating class's 4-year experience. You know, said differently, the amount of plastic saved in 1 year is enough to cover the university's football field. We calculate about 1.5 times. So that's a lot of plastic. You can see on the lower left, we reuse all of our trees. So if a tree falls down, you know, in a storm, or it has to be removed, we we reclaim it. These are some pictures out at our Chestnut facility in Wedgwood, Houston. We incorporate these tree materials into capital projects, and we use them in a variety of other ways. We take that very seriously. And I'll also say, I think in spite of COVID, we've made some significant progress on our goals in the past year. We've installed 20 big belly solar trash compactors. We achieved a 64.8% waste diversion rate. We composted 136 tons of food. We have 8 food waste collection sites on campus and 167 hydration stations. And I'll say on the food waste, that Linda and I have had some fun on the food waste topic. That's an area that she's a great expert on and very passionate about. And we're looking forward to some additional campus events in the future around that important topic. So let's go to the next slide. So I think it's critical, community engagement, within the context of Vanderbilt. So it's critical to keep the community involved and engaged with all of our activities. And this graphic, kind of shows some of our multi-pronged attempt to reach our community and get their feedback. We use Instagram, websites, newsletters, internships, Twitter, and more to get the word out and to encourage community participation in everything we're doing. I feel like we have to build trust and teamwork across our community on sustainability efforts. And a key way to do that, I think, is through transparency and also accountability. So I mentioned earlier that each year we publish an annual greenhouse gas inventory, and we also prepare an annual report to the community about progress we've made towards each of our goals. And then at the bottom of the slide, I note here some of the broadly diverse set of organizations that have been involved in the committee, the Mayor's Sustainability Committee. And again, once again, that was a real pleasure for me to participate in that ongoing work. And I'm so thrilled that Vanderbilt had the opportunity to be a part of these efforts. So next slide, and I think this is my last. Yeah, so we're proud. We're proud of our accomplishments on the sustainability front at Vanderbilt, but I'm going to tell you, we are not at all satisfied, not satisfied yet at all. So we like our 2050 carbon neutrality goal. However, my colleagues, the university, and our community really want us to move faster. And so I'll just say we are very actively exploring a number of ways to reach our targets much more quickly. And there's going to be more to come. So that kind of concludes my piece on Vanderbilt. And I think we're approaching the 1 o'clock time where maybe we can pivot to some Q&A or whatever's next, Jen.
Patrick, you're muted.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
You're good.
Excellent. So Eric, Linda, thank you both so much for that. Just jam-packed full of information. And while I've perused the reports, it's always nice to hear from the people who kind of put that all together and synthesize it. So thank you so much for that context. We do have some questions both from the chat and some other ones that we wanted to get to, but concerning time, since we are almost at 1, Jen, do you want to kind of maybe do the closing spiel and then we can just get to all the questions?
Yes, let me pull up real quick here. So as I'm pulling this up, as always, thank you all so much for being here. We are going to continue for the next half hour with some questions at Q&A and get your questions answered. But we also want to make sure that if you are having to end your lunch at this hour, we want to thank you for being here and also remind you that next Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream, is May 12th. I think I have that right. And it is our living building session. This one is going to be really super interesting. And I do believe I heard that Manuel Zeitlin is on this call, and he's going to be one of our speakers talking about living buildings, which go so much beyond just being sustainable in terms of construction. So, and how we build buildings. So it's going to be really, really interesting. Make sure you do register for that. And with that, I think that was all of the notes for the ending here. Have I missed anything?
Nope. The only thing I would add to that is everyone who registered and attended today, regardless of whether or not you attended, you're going to be receiving a follow-up email where you'll have any and all links that we discuss in the Q&A and before in the presentation, a link to this recording, all the relevant things will be packaged in a nice email. And with that, We're going to get to some of the questions. Eric, Linda, we have 3 questions for you all. Attendees, if you all have any questions, please keep putting those in the chat. We've got a couple so far. But our first question is, Nashville has had a series of sustainability-focused committees over the last several administrations that have all made recommendations on how we can move towards a sustainable city. How is this committee different? And how is this committee helping Nashville move from planning for a more sustainable city to actively creating a more sustainable city? I'm just going to toss it out to both of you, and we can see what we get.
Okay, well, I mean, I can jump in as a veteran of a lot of those processes earlier. It was certainly something I asked myself before getting involved in this. You know, I'd been on Livable Nashville and Green Ribbon Committee and others. I think, you know, first of all, as I mentioned, it was really important to all of us involved not to start from scratch, right? To start with what had already been done, and so much work had already gone into thinking about a lot of recommendations that were relevant to climate. So that was first of all a big piece. And then the other thing I want to note is that we're a standing advisory committee, so a little different than some of these other committees that had a specific task and a product, and then they were done and they handed it off to the city. And then, as you know, we've had so many leadership changes, like all great leaders, but a lot of leadership changes, and everyone wants to put their own, you know, footprint, or it's probably not the right way to say it, but their own mark, you know, on the sustainability agenda. So it was really important to us to try to have some of that continuity, but also that we're not going away, right? We're still going to be around. We're still going to be advising, and then more importantly, we're going to be implementing. And we, you know, are obviously need to work with the city on that, but I think there are a lot of things that our committee is well positioned to help implement. And Eric's mentioned some of those. I think there's so many things we can do with the business community and others to start in the philanthropic community to start implementing some of these actions that the mayor and the city are comfortable with. I mean, we are volunteers, so there's that limitation, but I still think there's a lot that we can do. And Eric, you might want to add to that or say more about what you're doing with universities.
Well, I think those are great. Yeah, I think, you know, something you touched on earlier, Linda, was the Mayor's Youth Council. And I think one of the most fun parts of our work to date on the committee was when a USN student, Oscar Fox, who truly is a great sustainability leader in the community, reached out to Linda and I to see if he and the Youth Council could somehow participate. And we were thrilled. They've been coming to the meetings. They wrote a statement that Linda referenced. I think to actively create a more sustainable city, we have to think about this as a multi-generational topic set here that, like our committee itself, is not going away anytime soon. And I just want to underscore the energy, the creativity, and everything else that the youth bring. And that's something that Linda and I talk about, is how do we actively, you know, incorporate even more forcefully the voice of the generations that are going to really have to own this in the long haul. I think that that's really important. And then, you know, I think it's also important. We're always trying to create fora, you know, on the Vanderbilt campus through a variety of events. There was a fantastic thing yesterday that I attended through the Robert Penn Warren Center, where Majora Carter came and spoke about a range of topics, and, you know, and the confluence of, you know, social equity and sustainability topics, which have increasingly become central to the committee. So those recommendations about a green financing committee, about an equity committee, those are real, and we need to move the ball on those so we can get those started.
And having a standing committee means that anyone who's interested out there can approach us and say, hey, I'd like to work on this. And there are some great ideas in the chat today, like on small dollar funding and things like that. Anyone, because there is this standing committee, we have a structure, please reach out to us, say, I'd like to work on this. And, you know, we would love to capitalize on your interests.
So Linda, that actually touches off on one of the questions I have here is what can Nashvillians do to get involved or support the work of the advisory committee?
Right. And I know Eric has something to say about this as well, but I will say, you know, the first thing you can do is reach out to us if you want to be involved, if you want to work on an implementation project. We're coordinating, you know, with the city on this, but we would love that support. I mean, in some ways, the most important thing you can do is let your elected officials know that you care about this climate action plan and that you want to see it implemented. Your council person, your mayor, they need to hear this because, they have a huge number of things they're trying to prioritize. And it really helps to hear from their constituents that this is important. And so, expressing your support in various ways for different measures in the climate action plan or the climate action plan as a whole would be invaluable. And Eric, I don't know if you have other.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great points. I'll just add maybe a couple more. Whether or not you're a member of the mayor's sustainability committee, you can attend and watch all the prior and future meetings. So we sent the website out, the prior meeting should be posted there, and future meetings again are open to the public. So you're always welcome to attend. And like Linda said, write to either one of us, if you have ideas or suggestions. I'm not necessarily the biggest subject matter expert on any of these topics, but I'm passionate about this subject area, and I'm always open to discussions and brainstorming or showing people the campus. So yeah, follow up with me and Linda. And I also, I haven't laid this one on you, Linda, but I had this idea as I was thinking about this morning about maybe conducting a series of citywide kind of sustainability listening sessions in the sense of community outreach that will go across the community, and we use the committee as a convening mechanism. And who knows, each session might focus on a topic or even a range of topics. And I'll say, in my experience here at Vanderbilt, I've personally found listening sessions to be a really powerful mechanism where you can get
I think that's that's a really interesting idea to talk with the mayor's folks about. And the other thing I just want to say, like, watching Eric's presentation was inspirational for me because I'm a lecturer in law at Vanderbilt, so I've worked at Vanderbilt, I've watched Vanderbilt evolve, and if you ever think for a moment that individuals can't make a difference, you are so wrong. Like, people will ask me, isn't it super depressing to work on these issues all the time, and don't always get traction on everything? And it's not, it's inspiring because people like Eric come in and make a difference. And Victoria, who I know is engaging in the chat, is another perfect example of someone who is just making a difference. We didn't have composting at the law school until she got there. And the other thing I would also say about, it's not just telling your local elected officials that you care, it's also telling the businesses you patronize that you want them to take action to reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, all excellent points there. This next question is actually one I have for Jenn. Jenn, I know we had a question to ask about the climate action plan, but I think it's already been very fully explained. So if you agree there, then I'm going to transition to our attendees questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. And just before we get going, I just want to give a big thank you to everyone who, when they were registering, submitted some questions or some answers to those questions. We provided those to our speakers. So hopefully a lot of those things were answered in their presentations, but just want to say thank you to everyone who did submit some questions and some answers there. All right. So our first question is there a plan for small dollar philanthropy? I imagine many citizens would like to contribute, and small dollar donations really could add up.
I love that idea. Honestly, had not thought of it. I love it. So no, there's no plan, but there needs to be a plan. So thank you for that idea. And the person who suggested it, if they want to reach out with any more specificity, but that's the kind of thing, and I'm sorry for this noise. That's the kind of thing that, we'll start looking at best practices. What are the best ways to set those up? What does it look like? Whenever you have money involved, it gets complicated in terms of the relationship with Metro. So it would, probably have to be a private endeavor, but I love that idea.
Yeah, and I would just say on that, another twist on that, and this relates to the dialogue I referred to earlier that I tuned into yesterday afternoon with Dora Carter, and people were talking about the centrality of real estate ownership to intergenerational wealth transfer and also gentrification and everything else, and ideas around community land trusts and things are being discussed, some of the good approaches, some of the less good approaches. But one of the ideas there was, when a community can be displaced by predatory speculative developers, that can wreak a lot of havoc, right? And not that that's happening all over Nashville in any case, but this notion of investing in community land trusts to continue to sustain communities, but then also to have a mechanism for people who might have $100, right, who could contribute to that and enjoy equally in the investment outcomes of that. So it's another take on this notion of small dollar donations, and it's a way to connect people meaningfully to the efforts, whether it's $1, $100, or $1 million. Having some skin in the game makes you feel connected to the efforts.
Yeah, could not agree more with that, Eric. And speaking of potentially sticky situations with kind of like a volunteer-based board with the Sustainability Advisory Committee and Metro Government, this next question is, are you advocating for the Biden administration's American Jobs Plan / infrastructure plan in Congress? If passed, this would provide significant resources for climate action in Nashville. Also, that's a great question. I didn't recall who asked it, but it's a great question.
Hey, you're on mute, Linda.
Well, I'll jump in this. So yeah, sticky question, because whenever you're supporting a specific piece of legislation, it triggers all sorts of lobbying rules, right? And so, for example, I work for a nonprofit that does not lobby. And so I cannot weigh in on specific legislation. And this was actually coming up also in the context of specific legislation in front of the council, right? And whether we could weigh in. And basically what we ultimately decided was that the committee itself was not going to be able to take positions on specific legislation, just because everybody, represents a different organization, and they all have different, restrictions on their lobbying. However, if there's any individual on the committee who wants to step up and support something, then that is, totally fine. They just need to clarify they're not representing the entire committee. So with that said, of course, so many of these federal programs and this administration's agenda could be incredibly beneficial to the city, but it isn't our role to weigh in specifically on those. And Eric, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think that that's really well said. And those notions of where you kind of draw the line between recommendations and sort of advocacy or even lobbying was something that we very carefully considered. And I think Linda outlined it really, really well. I think the thing that I'll say that, I'm very supportive of these notions for all the, I think, rather obvious reasons. But I also like to think, when I put my Vanderbilt hat on, Vanderbilt is like a city. It is a city in a sense. We have hundreds of buildings, we have millions of square feet, we have 24,000 parking spots, 340 acres of land, and we're a major destination center across the city, including a major healthcare system that resides on the Vanderbilt campus. And in that regard, we have a lot of infrastructure that supports the distribution and production of utilities on campus, for example. And, some years ago, we did kind of our first ever inventory of the values of all these, and really gauged, are we investing enough annually, not just to sustain, but to invest in even more sustainable infrastructure. And with a carefully thought out approach, that sort of, if you will, internal advocacy resulted in a much deeper understanding of these issues, and also a really decided direction that we continue to pursue, to take the long view and to understand that infrastructure is absolutely a critical element. When you're talking about budgets and things, it's not often the most attractive thing to talk about. We need to build bridges, we need to put in new pipes, we need to replace the steam pipes. How do we do that more sustainably? But it's really, really important. And I know we take that really seriously at the university, and we use our capital projects as an opportunity to kind of do the right thing. And that's the way you move the dial, on the all the time.
Yeah. And now, Eric, if you can kind of take your Vanderbilt hat off and put your sustainability advisory hat on, but still keeping construction and like development in your mind. This next question is, with all the new buildings going up in Nashville, how can builders get on board with this idea before construction starts? The Lions Head Shopping Center wants to put a 7-story apartment building where the old Starmont building is. There was a meeting with the builders and councilwomen last night, and there's a lot of pushback on the size of this complex. How can the city force builders to comply with green alternatives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the report touches on several of these topics. We think it's really, really important for members of the community to really encourage Metro Council and the city to adopt ever more stringent building codes. There was some recent progress made on that, but I think that there's much more progress to be made. This notion of a potential, if you will, carbon tax on facilities, I think is really, really interesting. But my view, broadly speaking, is we're at a point where I think, my view is, I've been in Nashville for about 9 years, and I think many years ago, I think Nashville might have been thirsting for people to come to the city, for companies to invest, et cetera. And as a result, there are a lot of giveaways to, private developers and, and people who just wanted to make a quick investment, build something, flip it and move on and be very, very profitable. And I think, we're the it city. People want to be here. There's so many reasons why Nashville is a desirable place to be. And I think the city needs to frankly exert more authority over the development conditions here and frankly force, developers to, adhere to higher standards. That's my simple view.
Eric doesn't mince words, does he? I love it. And he's right. We do have several recommendations in the report about updating the landscaping code, for example, to retain, more tree canopy, complete streets, making that in so that streets actually work for pedestrians and bikers. And that does not mean just drawing a line that says bike lane, on the same street. But, this is something that was raised in the chat that is a really big issue, which is the state legislature keeps intervening. I mean, a lot of the issues that we have, Eric's absolutely right. I think there was sort of a frenzy, for economic development. But the reality is the state won't let the city impose an impact fee on developers, right? That Nashville's literally like carved out. I mean, everyone else seemed to get grandfathered in, but not Nashville. And so, if you can't impose impact fees, that's huge. And if you can't, mandate affordable housing or density because you're getting preempted by the state legislature, that's just a really big problem. And so, this is happening around the country where you have, conservative legislatures coming in and telling, progressive cities that want to, do initiatives on sustainability, they're blocking them. And, the only way that changes is ballot box, right? So.
And one more comment, and this sort of is a hook for the next session that Jenn mentioned with Manuel on Living Building Challenge. It's also educating the community about the art of the possible in this regard. Buildings were a big deal and we like LEED buildings, but they're simply less bad than a code compliant building in terms of their impact on the environment. Well certifications are sort of like a recipe for the interior conditions of the building, but living buildings are truly regenerative. And that movement really believes that construction paradigms need to shift in some very radical ways, not just in terms of aesthetic design, but materials, how they're built from an equity and community perspective, et cetera. And that's, again, something where we need the city to understand those things better. And in fact, a couple of years ago, we did a Making Nashville Living Building Ready series at Vanderbilt that's somewhere on the web. And I think, educating people about the art of the possible here is really, really important.
And I think, we also, and this is part of what, needs to happen with the business community, is that we need to really understand this from a developer's perspective. What are the barriers? I mean, they're business people. They need to make money, right? Or they're not going to build. And so we need to understand what it is that's doable and not doable. And in terms of the art of the possible, as Eric's saying, to bring in companies that are doing it and still making a sizable profit.
Yeah, the art of the possible is just a really great phrasing there, and definitely something that hopefully all our viewers can embody, and everyone who listens and hears this can embody. But you both are absolutely correct. It's not just a linear issue. None of these things are. Yeah, great points. So this next one is kind of combining two questions. It's a two-part question as well. It's how does Vanderbilt sustainability goals and efforts compare with other universities in Nashville? And then the second part of that is there a collaborative effort with them as well as TSU, Fisk, Lipscomb, other colleges in the area?
Well, that's
Eric?
thank you for that question. It's actually interesting. We haven't collaborated as much yet as we would like with our local HBCU friends, as well as Belmont, Lipscomb, and they have some phenomenal people. There were some people from all of those universities involved in the Sustainability Advisory Committee, but this gets back to that slide and that discussion we had about leadership initiatives. And something that we intend to launch soon is kind of a local university collaborative effort where we can kind of get together as leaders from across institutions and simply share best practices, perhaps leverage economies of scale around approaches and techniques, et cetera. So I think there is more, much more to be done on that. And again, I also think it's really important, to do that in a way that is, welcoming and appropriate. Like I said, as I talked about Vanderbilt, I outlined a lot of things we're doing. And again, we are proud of those, but we're also not satisfied. And we also don't think we know everything whatsoever. We're trying our best. We're all learning together. And when you put more minds together, you get a better intellectual economy as well. So that's something that we do intend to work on and shortly, hopefully launch something.
Thank you again for that. I'm loving all the comments, guys. This is amazing stuff. And also to the viewers, our questions today have been top tier. And following that is something this next question is something that's very dear and near to me, because this is something as a homeowner that I've always just been wondering about. But what can be done to make solar power more affordable for homeowners? I would love to be off the grid as far as power needs are concerned, but I would have to take out a second mortgage to afford it. Thus, the ROI would take forever. And I can't recall who submitted that, but same, exact same.
Yeah, well, I'll start off on that. I'm not sure I have the perfect answer, but, when we approached TVA several years ago now about our aspirations to have 100% renewable electricity, there was no program in place. The community solar programs that were offered by TVA and NES were at a much, much smaller scale than what we required as Vanderbilt in terms of megawatts. And so through a lot of conversation, let's say, we were able to move the dial there. And now there is this program, Green Invest, for large, organizations and institutions. And I forget what it's called. Linda, you might remember, but we said to, our colleagues at TVA and NES, that's great. So that addresses like one sector. But what about the homeowners? You saw from the Metro Nashville community emissions, they dwarf the city, right? And it's homeowners, right? There's way more in square feet than there are in buildings. So there needs to be a program for that. And I'll let Linda comment in just a second. I also, am hopeful. Well, we know that the cost curves on solar and renewable energy are becoming much more favorable. So I also think that with the current administration and a big push on these topics, some of these initiatives like creating green internships and job opportunities can help accelerate, frankly, the development of those industries so that they become more affordable and accessible to people as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this was definitely something that was front and center for the subcommittee that looked at the energy issues. I mean, this question really captures it, which is they had a lot of recommendations that, because in their ideal scenario, there's a lot of behind the meter, solar. And
Mm-hmm.
One of the things they talk about is that there was a big project in Knoxville that was specifically for meeting communities' energy needs. And so one of the recommendations is that NES, Nashville Electric Service, should try to do a large scale solar array for the communities.
Mm-hmm.
As well. So that's not going off the grid, but it's providing the solar. And then the other thing, perhaps more relevant, is net metering policies, which is like, do you get credit, for generating your own solar? So these are all things that Nashville Electric Service really needs to wrestle with, and they in turn then need to deal with TVA. They have a lot of work to do. And the reality of the way, I don't want to always be, I'm like the bummer person giving you the law part that really sucks, like preemption. Well, so we've got some issues here where the Nashville Electric Service's charter is incredible. They have almost full autonomy to do whatever they want. Okay, they are not accountable to the mayor or other parts of Metro in most ways. So if the mayor says to NES, listen, we set these carbon goals and you need to help us figure out how we're going to meet them, NES does not have to do doesn't have to do it. And there is some control in terms of the mayor does appointments to the board, but that's a complicated relationship. And I think, again, it is really important for the mayor, for NES board to hear that people care about this and they want some change and they want it to be easier to get solar, whether it's, behind the meter, off the grid or not.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that is kind of just to crystallize everything you all said. Talk to NES. They have a lot of autonomy to do things, and there are a lot of things they can do, so they should be doing it. And that that individual pressure from, if you are an NES customer, they are inclined to listen to you and to kind of kick this ball down the road. I will send them an email later today, and I hope everybody on the call joins me.
Right. And, and here's the analogy I would just use. It's like, and because this is not a criticism of NES in the sense that, like DeCosta Jenkins in his they're running a really good utility. They're providing low cost energy in most cases. And the problem is it's a mindset shift that's happening around the country, right? And the analogy, we sometimes use this, like if you're a Blockbuster Video, right? You've got to look and see at the direction things are going and make that change, but it's hard to do. And if you don't make that change, then you have totally lost out to Amazon Prime and there's no place in the market, for you. And that's the kind of mental shift that needs to happen. And part of the way that happens is by hearing that this is important. It's no longer just about low cost, reliable. It's about clean energy as well. And so I'm not faulting the good people at NES. It's just, we're in a huge time of transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really quickly, Patrick, just to add to that, because I think Linda made a couple of really important remarks about the mind shift, and it takes time. But, from my experience with TV and NES, who we've been working closely with for quite a few years now, they've been fantastic colleagues. I want to make sure that is known. We came to them as a private institution with a big idea, and we worked through it together and did something really, I think, transformational. Now, it doesn't address some of the questions, and that's where further mind shift and further work needs to go. But I want to be clear, at least from my vantage point, the TVA and NES colleagues have been fantastic, and I see a really wonderful evolution occurring, and we need to continue to, promulgate revolution.
Yeah. And so got one more question for y'all with the time we have left, and that is hopefully a fun one. It's what are the next steps for the advisory committee now that the report is out?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is a series of public meetings where we're just doing outreach and education on what is the climate action plan and how does this all work. And then, as we said, the next steps are figuring out how we can move forward on implementation, what role the committee can play in implementing some of the recommendations that we've made. And Eric, I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the first really big push during COVID times was to get the report written, and we did that. And that was, that was a little bit extra challenging due to the circumstances we were all working under. But yeah, we're excited we've just shared with the mayor's team the proposed next set of dates and topics that we're going to cover. So that'll be publicized, shortly. I think we're working on times already. And I think the work of Janie Camp and Jacqueline that you mentioned earlier, adaptation and resilience as well. And I think that is an important part of it. And then the actual creation, socialization, and publication of the climate action plan itself are also critical next steps.
This has been so fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all again. Honored to have you both here. So thankful for just literally everything. I think I can safely say I learned a good bit and also have some
Really?
action steps to apply for my own life. Yeah, yes, really. So we are at time. Folks, again, you will be receiving an email that covers everything we just talked about. It'll also provide some ways if you have any further questions for Linda or Eric, you can get in touch with them to do so. Links to our upcoming shows, the recording from today, all of the things. Jen, am I missing anything?
I don't think you are. I just want to add one extra little thing because I think if I've got my days correct, tomorrow is the mayor's State of Metro address. So I did just want to share that, that he is going to be talking about what he's going to be looking at and what his priorities are going to be for the next year. So I think after this conversation, it would be great for you all to check that out, see what he has to say and stay informed on what Metro is looking to do over the next year. Otherwise, make sure you register for our next session. It is going to be so good. And again, I just want to say, Linda and Eric, thank you so much. I've had the pleasure of working with you in so many different situations, including this committee, but it was so wonderful to have you on today and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, till
Take
next
care.
time, everyone, take care, stay safe, and get some sunshine when you can. It's not out right now, but it will be. Yeah.
Bye all.
All right.
Bye.
Later.